not to be forgotten, the meeting's time today because it coincides with the 5th anniversary of the announcement of the closure of Holloway Prison. Thanks. Will.
Okay, thank you very much. So can we have the next slide, please, Richard? So who are the Community Clan for Holloway? Well, we're a group of local organisations and individuals that are from Islington and very interested in the development around the Holloway prison site. Want to see the best outcome for the community with people from churches, trade unions, campaign groups, individuals, all sorts of people. The first thing that happened was after the closure of the prison is the council produced a supplementary planning document which said there should be some social housing on the site, there should be a women's building, and there would also be some private development. And based on that, Peabody decided to buy the site, but they got a grant of about 40 million, of about 38 million, and a loan of about 40 million from the GLA to purchase the site. Next slide, please. So what have we been doing? We've been engaging with Peabody. It's been a patchy relationship, I think it's worth saying. Some bits have been good, some bits have been not so good. We've been engaging with Islington Council, especially around the scoping for the women's building, which they're leading on really. We've been engaging with the Greater London Authority as well, and the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor for Housing. We've been trying to reach out to all parts of our community in Islington to try and hear what's being said about what people would like to see on the site. As part of that, we've been organising meetings and protests, and we've also been developing working groups. Next slide, please. So we've now got quite a few. Some of these are newer than others, but we have a women's building group. We've got a group of on architecture and planning, one on environmental sustainability and housing in general, co-housing as an idea, disability, media group. We've got an inclusion group and a campaign group which has brought this meeting together. And I think we've done a fabulous job so far. Next slide. So the draft master plan, it says 1,050 apartments. This is some way above. I think that the top level the council thought was too much was 950, but it says 1050 apartments, 1,050, 40 are for private sale, 18% are shared ownership. I don't know whether you saw the Panorama programme last night on shared ownership. It's certainly worth a watch. It puts a big question mark over it. And 42% are described as affordable. Next slide, please. So this is the plan from a bird's eye view. You can see that they presently is a two-way road across the site, which we're not sure is necessary, to be honest, but the next speaker, Jonathan Ward, will get to that. The women's building is pointed out, but actually presently it's only one floor on the bottom of that building that is the women's building. Next slide, please. And you can see here there are some quite tall buildings being put up, 12 stories, 10 stories, 11 stories. So there are going to be issues about the height of those buildings and what they do to the lights around and the sun around the buildings, but others will cover that. Next slide, please. So there was an online consultation recently, and during lockdown, we thought some of the images used in the consultation were slightly misleading. I mean, the pictures there don't really look like the road around the site to me. We thought some of the questions were poor and questionable in themselves. They got 330 responses, which I know that Peabody are pleased with, but actually when we did our own consultation a few years ago, we got well over 900 responses, and that was what we were really looking for. And also when they were collecting their responses, they didn't ask for any demographic data about age and gender and ethnicity and all that kind of stuff, and disability, which would have been really useful. And we really wanted them to do that, but they didn't do it. Next slide, please. So the response to the proposed design, you can see that a lot of responses said that the buildings were too high. Many said they were too dense. Many were not happy with the format of the consultation, and many wanted more social rent. There was also interesting responses about the women's building and the need for a standalone women's building. The architecture and planning group sent a detailed kind of review letter with 34 topics and areas of concern. And we've recently had a general response from Peabody, but because they're going to come up with a new master plan, they've said most of the things that you were talking about are addressed in the new master plan. Next slide, please. Next slide. I have nothing to say. I'm going to pass over to Jonathan Ward from the Architecture and Planning Working Group. Jonathan.
Thanks, Will. Should just introduce myself. I'm Jonathan Ward. I'm a building engineer and I'm a member of St Luke's Church, which is just on the other side of Camden Road across from the prison. So I feel very sort of connected and attached to the site. I'm a member of the Architecture and Planning Working Group. And we've been working hard at reviewing the documents that have been sent through. I'm going to talk to you about 6 key issues that we have raised in our meetings and in letters that we've sent to Peabody and the GLA and in letters to the papers as well. Thanks, Richard. Next slide. The first one is the aspect of the site layout. It's very much the site layout itself and the road design. As Will explained, the road, there's a two-way road that cuts across the site, and we think this dominates and takes up too much space in the middle of the site, which is actually the park, which is and actually the sunniest part of the site. And it means you could actually, if you didn't have a two-way road that crossed through there, you could have another 700 square meters of park space. And just to give a feel for what 700 square meters is, that's like a pretty decent five-a-side pitch, quite a big five-a-side pitch. So we're not suggesting a five-a-side pitch, but it's that amount more space that the park could have right in the heart of the site. We consulted with Sustrans, who are an environmental transport charity, and they agree with us, and they would suggest that a home zone approach or a low traffic neighborhood type approach would be taken, which would be a couple of 2 cul-de-sac streets rather than interlinking streets, and that the design would be very much about shared surfaces and people-friendly streets. So we're pushing back on the overall layout of the site. Thank you. Next slide. So as Will explained, the heights of the buildings, particularly these shown in pink, they're on the south and west, also to the north of the central park there. They run between 10 and 12 stories high, and that's over 30 meters, which means they create really big shadows. And so this is an illustration of the central park on the 23rd of September at midday, and that's the size of the shadow that will fall across the park. As you can see, it's pretty dramatic, and this part of Islington is in an area that is acknowledged in a deficit of green open space. So one of the planning aims for this project, according to the Islington Council planning documents, is that it will deliver high quality green infrastructure, which means parks basically. And so we're really looking for a better design of the public spaces, and that probably means lower buildings to allow more sunlight into these public spaces. Next slide, please. So the courtyard design is another aspect of the overall layout which we're concerned about. These 2 spaces shown as 2 on the left-hand image and circles on the right are quite tight courtyards that are surrounded by buildings that are between 7, 8, 9 stories high. Now that's really, really tall. If you needed an illustration of a building that's about 9 stories high, 9, 10 stories, it's Hornsey Street as you go down towards the waste transfer station by Holloway Tube. Those buildings there are of that kind of height, of about 9, 10 stories high. So we're talking about the street there in the middle, shown as number 3, as quite a canyon-like street. And we're concerned that these courtyards, people's experience of these kind of courtyards is that they're very noisy, that kids, understandably, playing in the daytime makes some noise, and the acoustics are very poor for people living in the flats above. And if at night anyone's having a little party, making a little bit of a noise, as happens, then again, it's pretty tough for people living in the courtyard. There's also a concern that these are resident-only access, so they are forming part of the green space, but they're limited in access to who's actually allowed to use them. Next slide. And on a similar vein, there's two specific garden areas that are identified that are very overshadowed. They're on the north side of buildings. There's an older person's accommodation and a garden on the north side there, which is surrounded by buildings up to 11 stories high. And the women's building, which is really supposed to be a centerpiece for this site and an iconic building. Not only is it on the ground floor, but it's to the north side of buildings that are between, well, you can see the heights there, 7, 8, 11 and 10 stories high, which means they'll get both of these gardens will get very little sunlight, and they'll be windy because you get big downdrafts of a building that's 10 stories high. So we made comments about this. Next slide. So onto the apartments where people will actually be living, and we are very disappointed actually as the architecture and planning group, because dual aspect is the way to go for a good apartment design. That means you have windows on both sides of your space, and you can get good cross ventilation. You can get a nice through draft of cooling air, particularly in the summer when we are suffering from heat waves and with climate change increasing the summertime temperatures. We looked at this building that is the one on Parkhurst Road, and the red blocks illustrate how many of the apartments in that block are only one-sided. They just open onto an internal corridor, and there's no cross ventilation, no through draft for those spaces. And the orange ones are maybe sort of borderline cases, but it's the wrong way around. 70% of the apartments in this block are a single aspect, and really they should be targeting, the design should be targeting 100% of the apartments in these blocks as dual aspects, so they can be properly ventilated and they're comfortable. And Islington Council and other spaces are really promoting this very hard. So we're very disappointed that the design is poor on this aspect. And it's just worth noting that there's 25,000 vehicles a day passing along Camden Road and Parkhurst Road, and they obviously make a lot of noise and create poor quality air. So the chance to open your windows on the other side of the building away from that road when it's the noisiest and smelliest, then would obviously be very welcome. Next slide, thank you. And finally, the big omission in what we were shown in the draft master plan was really no sense. There was talk, there was use of the word sustainability, but there was nothing concrete about how those ideas will actually be delivered for the site. So it needs an environmental strategy. The council, Islington Council and the GLA are targeting net zero carbon emissions by 2030 and are very keen that the actual construction itself has very low carbon emissions, and none of this stuff was talked about in the draft master plan. And the SPD, the planning document that defines what we should be getting on this site, talks about the achievement of best practice sustainability standards. So a little bit later, Richard's going to be talking about the giving feedback from the Environment and Sustainability Group. So he will talk more about this stuff, and I will hand back to Rod, I think.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jonathan. That was really, really interesting. I imagine there'll be lots of questions. We have throughout this meeting 3 question and answer sessions planned. The first one will come up in about 10-15 minutes or so. So hold on to your questions. There's a lot of people on the call, so we'll try and do our best to get as many people to ask a question. And our next speaker is Niki Gibbs. She's also Director of Community Plan for Holloway and local artists, and she will talk to us about the women's building. Niki.
Hi, good evening. I hope everybody can hear me all right now. So yes, the women's building. So this presentation that I'm going to show to you now is actually a response to the council's draft master plan. I want to caveat this presentation with the fact that I have actually really just finished this. So we haven't sort of signed it off as a board or anything like that, but I think that it's a really good compilation of all of the feedback and the thoughts and people's ideas that have come together to put this forward. So what we're trying to say is that this, these drawings that I'm going to show you, we hope will feed into the feasibility study, which we're hoping can be done between Peabody, the council and community plan, to actually work out what the women's building actually will offer, what it needs to be, and possibly how some of those spaces might work together and how they might be financially viable. So maybe we have next slide, please. So this illustration here is, I'm not trying to design a building. I'm really not trying to design a building. I'm just trying to break it up into spaces that are sort of digestible and in a way that people can sort of read them, if you like. So what I've proposed here is on the ground floor, we have where you have general access to people. And when I say general, I mean families, both, all sexes, everything, because there is this very big thing about the women's building having women only services in it. So what Community Plan for Holloway is proposing is that, yes, there are lots of women's only services within this building, but there is also services that enable family therapy and that will be open to the public and open to the local community, like the workshops for the art and craft facilities. And also for the service providers, you know, the service providers, the charities and the organisations that used to work in Holloway, that this building is going to provide like-for-like services for. You know, they're going to have very general and broad workers for them. So then we're just going up quickly. We have from the ground floor, which would be the publicly accessible floor, we're looking at museum, multi-purpose hall, cafe, shop, maybe some area where we can have market stalls and things like that. Above that, workshops with the art and crafts that would also be accessed for the therapy, for art therapy. And above that, I've used the word resettlement because this is how it was referred to in the prism. So resettlement would include things like employment, housing, when people have maybe drug and alcohol problems, debt problems, all of these other, all of the service, maybe it's domestic violence, all of these services can come together and have outlets and offices with in the resettlement area that actually empowers women and helps them through any difficult circumstances they are in their life. Above that, therapy. So these would be for the different room sizes. They can be rented out for all different types of things. And then we've got service providers above that, and I've put an additional floor for service providers because at this stage we do not know which services might like to occupy space in the building, and that is a bit of research that has to be done in the future and through the feasibility study. And then on top we're looking at emergency housing. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I have produced this as a ground floor footage. I'm not trying to say that this is the ground floor footage. I just took all of the public spaces and put them together in one space, and that's the footprint that it took up. So I'm not trying to say this is what it has to be. This is just convenient for this illustration. And on this floor we have the creche, a women's building shop that can sell stuff that has been made either on site or in the building or through women's links. Museum and exhibition space that can rotate, have lots of different exhibitions on there. I've put a multi-purpose atrium halls where you can have indoor markets, especially at times like Christmas, but maybe ongoing weekly. And I've also suggested that you can enter it from both ends so that people can use it as a walkthrough, and therefore that will provide more access to those market stalls. We've got a multi-purpose sprung floor dance hall, which is proposed on the council's brief. And we've also got a public cafe, I've called it General Cafe, and a women only cafe, and a shared kitchen for these. And because of the services that are provided on the upper floors, we've put a pharmacy in there as well. And also like a reception lobby so you can get information and things like that. The two grey areas, the general WC and the stairwell, are kept in the same place, assuming that's some sort of core, and that all the plumbing and the lifts, etc., would go up in one space. So next slide, please. I just caveat that the garden area is on the ground floor, so that's not coming up with us. So on this workshop floor, I've got all the workshops that would be really great for not just the art therapy, but for the community engaging, where women and the community can learn new skills and new hobbies and just produce art creatively and productively. And this could possibly be on some sort of timeshare basis with women only services. And I'll just whiz round them quickly. So we've got cookery, languages, obviously people need to have different language lessons. IT, very important if people are going to be working at home a lot more. We've got a soundproof and recording room because that would enable people to do small presentations and it can be hired out. We've got craft workshops, art workshops, printing, because printing is a big thing, not only art printing, but also printing for the community, if lots of people are working from home. Ceramics workshop, which was one of the most popular things within the prison, and a textiles workshop, because mending our clothes in the future is going to be one of those things we all have to learn to do. So next slide, please. And this floor is the therapy floor. So I've just taken from the council's brief the sizes of rooms that they were suggesting, and I've placed them around so that we can show that there's some small one-to-one therapy rooms, but also some larger therapy rooms and bigger rooms that could be hired out for commercial venture. And I would also suggest that these rooms could be really thought out in how they look and feel, so that it can give therapy a different experience, and they could be really imaginatively laid out and designed. We'll move to the next slide, please.
Niki, I'm so sorry, but
have I got to be quicker?
A little bit quicker, but we're running quite a bit behind.
Okay, I'll be quicker. Right, next floor is all the services, employment, legal services, drug and alcohol, family services. And so these would be areas that everybody could come and help for generations. Next slide, please. And then we've got the offices for the company, the like-for-like services that will be in the prison, in this building, that were represented in the prison. I won't name those. Next floor, next slide, please. Here we have for the emergency housing. So we're suggesting housing that would be for a short term, maybe a few weeks, to help people get other housing, whether that be in the community, probably not off the housing list, maybe in people's homes or something like that. But that's for another discussion. But next slide, please. This is the roof dome, where we've got a geodesic dome that can be lit up at night for a beacon for women everywhere, and a rooftop cafe. And this could be used for educational, for growing purposes, and as a real iconic feature. Next slide, please. These three spaces would be satellite spaces underneath other buildings. That would be for the IT, gardening workshops, and the bicycle hub SIGs. It's going to be a car-free zone, and obviously the legacy garden for art and sculpture and to memory the prison. Next slide, please. And then we go back at the building again. So thank you very much. We can move on. Cheers. Thank you.
Niki, that was absolutely wonderful. The amount of work that the Women's Building Working Group and you have done on this is really, really good. The detail is quite extraordinary. Clean Break is a women's theatre company changing lives and minds, on stage, in prison and in the community. Clean Break was founded in 1997 by two women prisoners who believed in the transformative power of theatre to change lives. Through theatre workshops and projects in prison, the community and the London Centre, they help to build confidence, resilience and well-being to transform the lives of women who have experienced the criminal justice system or who are at risk of entering it. This performance was written and performed by Anne Whitley, a member of Clean Break. She says about the piece, we were asked to write a monologue inspired by Cleanbreak's historical archive. I chose to base that monologue on a fictional character involved with the founders of Cleanbreak's first ever prison play.
I was never interested in acting. I thought it was all a bit la-di-da like, you know what I mean? A bit soft like. See, I was planning to be a catwalk model when I got out of that dump. Yeah. But my mate Diane, that was the lass I was padded up with, yeah. She told me you had to be at least 5'8" to be a catwalk model. 5'8"? 5'8", I said. Give over, that can't be right. Well, she said, it were gospel. Well, that were me buggered, weren't it? And you see that loser that got me banged up in here in the first place? He only went and jibbed off with someone else, didn't he? I ain't seen hide nor hair of him since the day we got nicked. Well, I couldn't rely on him either, could I? Anyway, my mate Diane, yeah, I think she was trying to get me mind off all my troubles and that. And she told me there were a couple of lasses on the sea wing by the name of Jacqueline and Jenny. And they'd wrote this play. And they were going to perform it, like, to the other prisoners and the people on the out, you know. And why didn't I have a go and, you know, try out for it and that? I said, try out for it? Me? Me? I'm not interested, I said. All that acting palaver. Well, she said, the governor's given permission for anyone that gets involved. We were going to get extra time outside our cell. Well, I thought, I'm interested now. I'll give it a go. So I did. And I tell you what, it were right good fun, it were. Turns out I was all right at this acting lark. And obviously Jenny and Jacqueline thought so too. They only went and gave me a blooming part. Yeah, me, a bloody actress. Well, I never. And it's not as easy as it looks, you know. It's hard work, it is, all that rehearsals and that. But I could see how serious all the other women were taking it. And I decided right there and then that I was going to take it serious and all. And I did. Well, I thought, you never know where it could all end up. Thank you.
That was thanks very much for Cleanbreak for doing it for and Whitley. That was. If you have any questions, there's quite a few people on screen. So if you just raise your hand, I may not see you because I don't have all 82 participants on my screen. But if you maybe try and use the raise hand feature in Zoom, then I can pick you up like that. So if you have any questions for Will or for Jonathan or for Niki about the women's building, please go ahead.
There's a question here from Morag.
No, I never put my hand up. I was clapping.
Fantastic. Then I have a question from Frank David. Frank, who would you like to ask your question to?
Hi. I was very impressed with what Niki was going through. I know of a group in my hometown, Vancouver. They're a special interest group run by mental patients. They've been around for about 50 years now. And they have a skyscraper in a very nice part of town. And it's set out very much like Niki was going through, floor by floor by floor. Of course, we have different planning regulations in the colonies, And I'm just wondering if Niki's idea was based on anything that she knew, or is this just a brand new creation with the tiers on different floors?
Well, I sort of have two answers to that, really. I sort of flawed them just for sort of convenience, but it seemed to work. We had a conversation about a One Small Thing project that's been done in Hampshire recently that is really, really closely aligned to the sort of thing that we're doing here. It turns out that they've done an awful lot of research, and they've come up with a really similar amount of space. So the space that I added up in the spatial analysis came to between 4,000 and 6,000 square feet. So I don't know where that's gonna go, but that was just what I could throw at it. But the actual this idea of the women's building, it's come from lots of places. It's come from talking to people about existing women's centres, but also looking very closely at this specific site, because it's the prison site and those specific things that are needed for women who have left the criminal justice system. And if you help women that have been helped, that need help from the criminal justice system, when they get released back into the communities, you can prevent them from going there. You help all women. So I think we've had to be quite broad with our with our view on this.
Thank you.
Thanks. Then I have a question from Sophia Compton. Sophia?
Hiya. Yeah, I'm just wondering who, I don't know who it's for, but I'm wondering who is leading the charge with the Women's Building Garden, and which segment of the community plans work that comes under.
I don't think we've instigated the charge yet.
The charge has not been instigated. Okay.
Yeah, it's in the planning. Think of it like that.
Yeah. No, because I'm just,
good
it's
point.
Something that I'm interested in, and I'd be happy to help on. So would be happy.
Brilliant.
To
Great.
Start the charge.
Start the charge. Oh God. Okay. Charge. Here we go.
Fantastic. Thanks. I also have a question from Sarah Martin, and after that, Suzanne.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, with the discussion about the buildings themselves, about the buildings being very tall, I know that there's also a lot of discussion about the number of flats, and also in particular the number of flats that are for social housing. Is there any way of kind of getting the same kind of number of flats that are needed, but having lower buildings?
Maybe a question for Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we're going to touch on slightly more personal views here. I think what we're concerned about, so it's my view, and the guys in the architecture and planning group, is that it's this massing that isn't going to be good for the people that live there. It's going to create very overshadowed spaces. Even the apartments there are going to be overshadowed. So I think there's got to be the right, we've talked about a livable density, which basically says the right number of homes there. The council did a capacity study, and they found that 720 homes was really quite a good number to put there. There was a number, as Will said, in the low 900s that they thought needed careful consideration and planning in terms of like wind and shadowing and these kind of things. So it's constantly being pushed up from those kind of numbers to the 1,050. So I don't actually think, well, the council's capacity study has answered that question for you, which is that really a really good livable density is in the region, let's say 700 to something over a bit over 900. But they didn't go as far as over 1,000. We've also got to remember the council, the list is about 14,000 homes. So whatever we deliver here on this site is not going to actually end the housing crisis that we've got in Islington. And they've got to, I think they should be built well. It should be a livable density and not overdevelopment.
Thanks. Thank you, Jonathan. We'll do one last question from Suzanne Lamido, after which I hand over to Alexandra to introduce our next speakers. Suzanne?
Right. I'm following all of this. Just noticed, I don't see any plans for like a children's park. You know, the way they do them now, you've got them all over in the community centres. There has to be something for small children with the with the what's that bouncy grass called, and the equipments and things, because they have to play somewhere. Otherwise, where would they go? And I haven't seen an area marked out for that kind of activity.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite clear guidelines in planning. There's quite each age range of child needs to have a certain amount of play area. So there's play for older children and younger children in that Central Park area. Actually, somewhat controversially, they've also shown play on the roofs of the building, and the consultation asked questions about that. It just doesn't quite feel right. It might be play for the residents of that particular block if they have the children who want to go up there, but it's hard to see how this play provision that's up on the roof could ever be publicly accessed. So it's another sort of sign that actually the design is squeaking a little bit, and they just got to try and find somewhere to put the required play. So they're popping it on the roofs of the buildings. It doesn't seem a good way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan. Can I just hand over to Alexandra, please? And Alexandra can host the next session.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming this evening. It's so wonderful to see such a great turnout. It's fantastic to have you here. My name's Alexandra Lilly. I'm the priest in charge at St George's, Tufnell Park, and one of the directors of Community Plan for Holloway as well. We're moving into a section looking particularly at housing, and I'm going to hand over in a moment to Andy Bane, who's here from Islington Homes for All. We're then going to go on to look at the social housing group, the new working group that's been set up, and we're going to hear from Gulcin, Ozdemir, one of our local councillors, and Lawrencia Frempong, who's part of that group as well. And then we're hoping that Diarmaid Ward might have joined us by then, and then he will share as well for 5 minutes. So firstly, over to Andy Bane. Andy, are you there? I can't hear you if you're speaking at the moment.
Oh, sorry. Right. Islington Homes for All, its origins are back in Islington Hands Off Our Public Services, which started over 10 years ago. We took up housing issues in October 2015, and in January the next year set up Kill the Housing Bill. When it became an act, unfortunately, we changed to Axe the Housing Act. And it's worth noting that the worst of this act was shelved, partly due to public pressure and including a bit of effort by us, no doubt. Next slide, please. In 2016, Holloway Prison closed, and we started working with the Centre for Crime and Justice and others, and we maximised our efforts on council housing as our focus. Next slide, please. We pride ourselves in being challenging, visible and imaginative, as the next few slides show. And it's worth noting in this period that in June 2017, the Grenfell fire happened with 72 deaths. And this shook up public opinion on housing, its regulation and accountability. Next slide, please. On the 14th of November 2017, that was the day before the end of the bidding to the MOJ for the prison site. It was followed by months and months of informal tender discussions. So next slide, briefly. And then the next slide, and then slide number 7, the one with the Wendy House. Yes, so in October, November 2017, we ran a petition of 7,000 signatures to get the mayor to buy the land for Islington Council to build council housing with its waiting list of 14,000. He unfortunately chose the affordable housing by others instead. Now, at that time, 8 to 10% of social housing in new developments was the normal end result. So we knew we had a battle ahead. Next slide, please. In early 2018, our national organisation changed its name and we followed to be Islington Homes for All, which we are now. And at these hustings, which you'll see on that slide there, all the local parties were persuaded, let's say, to support more social housing. Slide 9, please. So back then our demands were land in public ownership, 70% to be council housing, good community facilities, and we later specifically supported the women's building, and more of that later, plus green spaces. Slide 10, please. So slides 10 to 14 show that we brought some Christmas cheer to our protest, so you can move through slowly. Though the sale announcement was now long overdue, but it was expected quite soon at that stage. So you just move slowly to slide 14. The perception of a well-organised opposition to building of luxury flats probably added to the delay in the sale and possibly also reduced the price. The mayor also was very involved and wanted to claim as his own the hundreds of affordable homes, inverted commas around affordable. So on to slide 15, and at last on the 8th of March 2019, we'll move to slide 15 slowly. The announcement was made on the sale to Peabody. It was for 82 million, subsidised by a loan of 42 million from the GLA. The terms of which were kept secret. 60% of the total would be affordable housing, split 18% to be joint ownership or London affordable rent, and for households respectively earning up to 90,000 or 60,000. And 42% to be social housing, implying council equivalent. The remaining 40% was for the very profitable private sale. The mayor stated later that a women's building, quote, that recognises the site's importance and historical connection to women should be delivered. Islington Homes for All welcomed these proposals, but was sceptical that this would be the end result without continued pressure from local people. So that's what we arranged over the next year and a half. Now, Peabody has been elusive on what social rent means, suggesting it's less than the higher London affordable rent, but not confirming council equivalent. And we must have council level rents. So moving on to the last slide. Islington Homes for All has been opposed to the 18% so-called affordable joint ownership and London affordable rent category and wanted this to be social rents too. In early October this year, the revelation of the 18th of March 2019 Freedom of Information request exposed a previously unknown publicly funded strategic partnership grant of 39 million, roughly half the cost of the site. So we reaffirmed our position there. Once the loan is paid back, Peabody will only have paid half the price of the site. So it can well afford the women's building and it can well afford 60% social housing at council equivalent rents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's very helpful. I'm going to hand over now to Gulcin, who's going to take us through sharing a bit about what the social housing working group have been up to.
Hi, thanks everyone. Hi, I'm Gulcin and I'm part of the social housing working group, and we look at specific issues such as tenure mix, the number of units, what intermediate rent and shared ownership looks like, and also service charge. But we're also campaigning for the maximum amount of social rent on the site as well. Peabody initially promised 42% of social rent, and they backtracked to 35% quite recently. After campaigning and the campaign that Islington Homes for All has done, the community plan for Holloway and the council, we welcome the news that they have committed to the 42% equivalent social rent, equivalent council equivalent rent now. However, we know due to the amount of people on the waiting list, which is 14,000, many of those living in overcrowded homes, the rise of homelessness, that this is just going to be a dent into tackling the housing crisis. So we are going to continue to push for 60% genuinely affordable rent. And this excludes the 18% that is most likely going to be shared ownership. We don't actually know at the moment. And we know that, have no doubt that shared ownership is not affordable. It's definitely not affordable for those who live in Islington. The median income of those who live in Islington is around 20,000. And to be able to afford shared ownership, you need a minimum income of £60,000, making it completely unaffordable. So we have a little video of those from the placard parade talking about why genuinely affordable housing is important to them. And then Lawrencia would also speak about, give 2 examples about families that live in overcrowded homes and how that's impacting them. So if we just play the video, thank you.
I mean, mainly because I'm concerned about homes and the lack of social housing in Islington, particularly for families, but also for other people. You know, how impossible it is to get a decent home.
We've got 14,000 people on our housing register. They all need a home. Many are overcrowded families, homeless families in temporary accommodation.
We know that housing is one of the core elements of safety, that having safe housing is something that makes a huge difference to people's lives, right?
Peabody promised 60% generally affordable housing. I would love to see a top quality design, housing that is sustainable, zero carbon construction and build.
We know that what they call genuinely affordable is not affordable for a lot of people.
And most of them really can only afford council rents. So I'm very, very anxious that we should maximise the number of homes for council rents on the site.
So I think there's a problem across London generally about needing affordable homes, but particularly on this Holloway site. I think just crucially, this has to be, homes that local people can afford. And so we have to put people before profit.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think I'll hand it over to Lawrencia, if that's okay.
Oh, hello, everyone. Yes, I've been involved in the social housing for a while. I'm also one of the directors. I would like to shed a light on social housing needs in the borough. Myself, I was on the rehousing list for nearly 10 years with children, 4 children in 2 bedrooms. So that took us a long while to be rehoused. That was 10 years ago. Now, currently, it's still happening. This is a need for more social housing so that Islington Council can afford to meet the needs of people on their list. One example is there's a parent with 1 child in year 6. Finally, she got rehoused, but it was so far away. It's on the outskirts of Islington, so between Islington and Hackney. Now, she was happy. However, they had to take 2 different bus routes to get to school. And also they had to wake up much earlier than before, and they get home much later. So this was impacting greatly on the child's life. They're still dealing with it until the child goes to secondary school. So although it's positive, the implications are also harder for the family. Another family is a single parent with 2 children, 1 10-year-old, the other is 5-year-old, boy and girl. They are all in 1-bedroom house, which means that sleeping patterns change. It's never set in stone. There's always a difference in the time they can sleep. It impacts on homework. It impacts on when they can wake up. 1 child sometimes is sleepy at school because of the impact of overcrowding. It also affects their mental well-being. I think it's not something that it can be taken lightly. However, the houses are not available. That is why we should press so hard for Peabody to provide what we are asking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gulcin. Thank you so much, Lawrencia, for what you shared. That's so helpful in our discussions. I'm going to hand over now to Diarmaid Ward, who's joined us. Diarmaid, you just have 3 minutes to share with us, and then we're going to go into Q&A.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'll be very brief and try and keep to the 3 minutes. I just want to very quickly first reflect on just how far we've come. What a brilliant turnout tonight. And this has been a long campaign, and everyone has fought so hard. This goes all the way back to 2016. The MOJ had 1 reason to sell it, and 1 reason only, and that was pounds, shillings and pence. Islington, central London, prime real estate, let's squeeze every last penny out of it. So when the council, with the big help from the community, released our planning brief, our SPD, we had just 1 reason for that, and that was to send a very, very clear signal to the market that anyone who bought this site had to adhere to our planning conditions. Most importantly, as everyone's just said, genuinely affordable housing, as much social rent housing as possible, and a women's building, green space, community facilities. And at that stage, we had no idea who was going to buy it. Finally, it emerged it was Peabody, and since Peabody got involved, the community has kept on fighting. As Gulcin has said, there was some doubt over the figure of at least 42% social rent housing, and that was despite the fact that when Peabody bought it, they announced a great fanfare that they would do 60% genuinely affordable housing at a 70-30 split, which would come out as at least 42% social rent housing. It then emerged this was being backtracked on, and the reason given why for this backtrack was, oh well, we wanted the mayor's product, London Affordable Rent, which is slightly more expensive than council rent, which is the social product that we're talking about here. And for very, very good reason, the council were not happy with that, and the community were not happy with that, because genuine social rent is what's needed in the borough. So I was very, very pleased this week to see that we have won a victory on that, and that's now set in stone, because the GLA have announced that they will be providing at least 42%, that Peabody will be providing at least 42% social rent, as in council, what I call old school council rent on the site, and that's at least 42%. I know that quite rightly, some of the campaigners tonight have said that they want to go beyond that, and it's quite right that we campaign to get as much social rent housing as possible. I agree with what's been said tonight as well about shared ownership. We have actually put in our planning brief as well in the SPD that if you are going to do an intermediate product, then shared ownership is increasingly difficult to afford in the borough, and that if an intermediate product is going to be there, then something like London Living Rent should be considered as an alternative to shared ownership. And London Living Rent means that your rent is no more than a third of the median income in that particular ward. So something which is maybe suitable for someone who works locally, maybe a teacher or a nurse who probably isn't going to get on a council housing waiting list, but at the same time simply can't afford to rent locally at an affordable price. So I was very, very pleased that we got that victory this week, and I want to thank everyone in the community who campaigned so tirelessly for that. In terms of where we go next, we are imminently expecting the latest unveiling from Peabody of a much more detailed plan for the site. We haven't seen that yet. The previous incarnation lacked any detail at all, really, and I know that a number of people here tonight were very, very concerned about the lack of detail in the previous plan. So we are expecting a much more detailed one. We were expecting it on the first week of September, and given that we're now nearly in December, we still haven't seen that. I am taking that as a good sign rather than a bad sign. I have to say I'm staying very, very positive about that, and I'm taking that as a sign that Peabody have listened intently to all of the comments that have been made over the past many, many months by lots of campaigners right across the borough about how we won't accept anything less than a top-notch scheme. And I mean top-notch in terms of numbers of social rent homes, but also in terms of quality, and in terms of green space, and a women's building that's fit for purpose. So I wish I could say, I wish I could come here tonight and say, yes, Peabody will be unveiling the latest consultation tomorrow. I can't say that, unfortunately, but we are expecting it very, very soon. And as I say, I think the fact that we've had to wait for it is a good sign, and a sign that the campaign is having the effect that it should be having. And the announcement this week about the number of social rent homes feeds into that as well. In terms of the women's building, I've been chairing a regular meeting with various people who are here tonight, various campaigners on the women's building, trying to get it to a point where we can have a building which is iconic, but which also replaces those vital services that Holloway had, because Holloway was many things, but it was in one way, of course, a hub for all of those specialist services for vulnerable women, which developed at Holloway. And London no longer has a women's prison at all. There isn't any women's prison in London. And when we lost Holloway, we lost that hub for all those vital specialist services for vulnerable women. So we need a women's building that can fit that bill. We have been working with Peabody to, at this stage, secure that space on the site, make sure that space is flexible enough for our needs. And I know that a number of people here as well are concerned about the management and funding of the centre and how all that's going to work. And so I've also been talking with Peabody's regional director about how Peabody can get involved in a feasibility study, what that would entail, and then how we can get to a point where we can actually talk in detail about the management and funding of the building as well. So I'm sure I've gone away from my 3 minutes, have I, Alexandra? But I should maybe leave it there. I'm very happy to take any questions, but most importantly, I want to thank everybody in the campaign for getting us to where we are now.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Diarmaid. If you don't know Diarmaid, he's the housing lead for the council, so it's great to have you with us today. Thank you. We have got 4 minutes for Q&A. We've got another section of Q&A later on in the meeting. I see someone waving their hand. Is it Pamela is waving a hand? If you want to go first. Anyone else want to put up their hands on the electronic hands raising on the participants panel? That's fantastic. And I will ask your questions. But Pamela, over to you for the first question.
Well, thank you very much. As somebody who was in the chapel at Holloway 5 years ago yesterday, hearing the announcement of closure, it's amazing to see the fantastic work that's been achieved. I think that the point about women is that when you support women, you support the entire community. And since the building would take up about 10% of the space, I think that there is an enormously important point, because the entire space before was totally devoted to women, and the women, not just women involved with the criminal justice system, but all women, to feel that that's a creative and helpful place, and to think of the massive addition of strength and insight that would contribute to the community. If we've learned anything about COVID, I hope we're really learning how we're interconnected, and you help one person, you're really helping a group of people. So thanks for everybody. That's really great. Keep going with the women's building.
That's great. Thanks so much, Pamela. That's a really inspiring, encouraging comment to make. Thank you. Mary, would you like to share your question?
Yeah, just I'm a key worker and I'm very concerned that there isn't affordable housing on this scheme for key workers. I'm a nurse. I had an experience last week about, I was going to look at a Peabody place in Upper Street, near Upper Street. And Peabody was so damn rude to me. They basically said, oh, you can't afford it, don't bother coming to look. And I was like, well, how are you making this affordable? This is shared ownership. So I think we need to highlight, if it's the intermediate rent or shared ownership, it needs to be affordable for people who fit that category. And this is what I'm really concerned about. Like, I live on Hornsey Street, and I understand when they're saying about the light and the big buildings and the wind, and I understand all of that. And I've only got lighting on one side of my flat. So I fully understand that. But I'm really concerned that I'm going to end up staying where I am in rent that's so expensive as it is. And also, after watching that programme on BBC last night about Peabody, I just think they're in for the profit, and I really don't think they should have got this tender. Yeah, I could go on, but I won't.
Thanks so much, Mary. Thank you for all you're doing in your job, and thank you for sharing with us. And I'm so sorry you had that really terrible experience. I don't know if Diarmaid or Gulcin would like to share.
Shall I try and answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mary, thanks very much for your question. It's a very, very important one. So firstly, just to clarify the last thing you said, it wasn't a case of Peabody getting a tender. If I had my way, the site would have been given to the council. It would be council housing. Unfortunately, that's not how it worked. The Ministry of Justice put it up for sale, and Peabody were the ones who bought it. I too have concerns about Peabody, but compared to some of the bidders who were in line to buy this site, I think there's just a world of difference. I don't want to tell you about some of the people who were in line to buy this site. I think you're absolutely right, Mary. Increasingly in the borough, shared ownership is being shown up as an unaffordable product for most people. Certainly, most people working in the public sector in very important jobs like yours, and that's why in our supplementary planning document, which is basically the document we use to reiterate our policy as a local planning authority, we've highlighted that, and we've said that if there is going to be an intermediate product, that should be London Living Rent rather than shared ownership, because London Living Rent, the rent won't go beyond a third of the median income in that particular ward. So absolutely agree with you. There needs to be a decent middle way product.
Okay,
Thanks very much. Thanks so much. We're going to just take one more question, and that's going to be from Catherine, and then I'm going to hand over to Rod.
Hi, thank you very much. This is the first time I've been involved in this group, and really interesting what's going on. I live nearby. My background is in sustainability, and this goes back to the previous presentations, and I was wondering how AHMM could not include an environment statement or a statement on sustainability in terms of the development, because that is a critical part of the planning application. So I was just wondering whether it's included, and included with that should also be the socio-economic sustainability of the development. So just wondering, maybe there was something that I've missed because of not being involved before. I have sent an email to the group, and I would like to be involved in this. So I'm not quite sure who, but yeah, just a question to who presented it. So I can't remember the name.
Maybe to
Catherine.
Jonathan.
Yeah,
Jonathan,
thanks, Alexandra. Catherine, I can quickly answer, but basically we're not at the planning stage yet. So we're at the draft master plan stage. So this is really about Peabody providing a presentation of about 25 pages on the draft master plan ideas. The environmental impact assessment scoping has been done, which is a piece of kind of, it kind of does what it says on the tin, really. It decides what all the important environmental issues are that when the planning application comes in should be addressed. And we've made comments on that, and glad to say that the council supports, the planning department support our comments, or we were in line with them, and they've had to now add to their environmental impact assessment things like health and well-being and climate change, which were scoped out and they weren't going to look at. But we are awaiting a planning application sometime after Christmas. As Diarmaid says, really, I don't think we know, but we expect another round of consultation on what might be a draft planning application. I don't quite know what it's going to be called, but it'll be a consultation round sometime January maybe. Okay. And then I imagine it'll take a few months. So I don't know if anyone's got any ideas, but I would have thought sometime towards the middle of next year would be a planning application, because there's a huge amount of documentation, as you know, probably Catherine, that it needs to be prepared, and that's when all that detail should be forthcoming, but not yet.
Okay, and I mean the other thing is that we've got Islington Council on our side, who are really ambitious, particularly with their carbon reduction scheme, and this needs to be seen as sort of a highlight part of action, council putting their words into action through this. But also the requirements for the socioeconomic sustainability in terms of job creation and skills and apprenticeships. Are you going to be seeing drafts of those as well?
Yeah, you're going to hear more from Linda on that
okay.
very shortly. But I would also say, just worth remembering, the council have a target of net zero zero carbon by 2030.
Yeah,
it's probably going to take, I don't want to quite say the wrong time period here, but I reckon we're talking, 5 to 7 years to get this built out, this site. It's really big, it's really complicated. You can't just do the whole thing at once. You have to do it in stages, in phases. And with the delays we're seeing at the moment, it will be towards the end of the decade before the last home is finished on this site. And certainly then the strategy for net zero carbon really should be shown in the construction, and why not start now? Really, other buildings in other projects in the city and in the borough are demonstrating this commitment to the 2030 target.
Well, it's new build.
Thank you so much. Thanks. I'm so sorry I have to cut you off there. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Jonathan. We're actually going to be looking more at sustainability and also training and apprenticeships in our next bit. I'm going to hand it over to Rod.
Thanks, Alexander. Thanks everyone for staying with. We have three more speakers, which should take us another about 15 minutes. Talking about co-housing and building for the community integration on the site. We'll talk about training and employability, how we can the redevelopment can address that, and we'll have a section about environment and sustainability from our environment sustainability work group. So our first speaker, one of the directors of the Community Plan for Holloway, Marge Mayo.
Thank you. We put the slides up, please. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, my name's Marge, and I'm involved in the co-housing group. I think this picks up very much on the point of sustainability, but in terms of communities, because what we're about is really building a strong, inclusive community. So the co-housing group is about really looking outwards and building this sense of community. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, thanks. So why co-housing? I think the point is it's not just a load of housing. Co-housing communities are actually created and run by their residents. It's not a commune. Everybody has their own space, but we look out for each other, build support, like the kind of mutual aid groups that have been springing up in the pandemic. We do share activities, regularly eat together, and have organize other activities, which hopefully will be of great interest to other people on the site. So we'll be looking outwards to try to build this sense of community on the site. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, Stephen, who's also been very much supporting the group, has produced these lovely slides. This is important just to show really how successful co-housing is. It's a movement that is really developing both in London and in other places. And there are some really good examples of co-housing as well as more rural co-housing. Next slide, please. So what are we actually looking for on this site? We're looking for up to 30 mixed tenure homes. In other words, 42% for social rent, but I mean, I completely accept the point about 60% in terms of what should be available for social renters, and of course for a limited number of people who buying their flats, leasing their flats. Co-housing is going to be a genuinely mixed community reflecting the wider community on the site. Okay, so the next slide, please. These are some of the things that co-housing do, bring people together. We definitely need a hall with space with a kitchen, which can have events that we would organise and which other members of the wider community would join. Spaces for workshops. I think if you share some facilities, you can manage much better. You don't need to have a spare room, for example, because you can have a spare room that you can book for family to come to stay. I think there are lots of ways in which co-housing can actually help to support other social goals. So, for example, people can downsize. It can be very supportive to families with children who can help each other out with childcare. It can work very well for older people who can give each other that extra support. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so then this is where are we going? I hope I've convinced you, those who either didn't know or weren't interested in co-housing, that this is something that we would really like to see on the site. We want to produce plans. With this, initially people have been less than enthusiastic. In fact, they haven't been interested at all. I feel very confident now that the council, I hope, are really coming round to the idea and are being much more supportive. And that's brilliant. We certainly need to be identifying potential members and consolidate the group, because I think that co-housing works best when the group really shares plans together about how they want it to be, how they want to support each other, and how they want to take decisions and build a shared sense of purpose even before they move into their flats, into their new homes. We've had fantastic support from the GLA-funded community-led housing hub, and they've given us all sorts of advice and support, and we're continuing to look to them for advice. This is where we're at now. We're definitely interested in new members, and if you are interested, our secretary is Jill, and so please do get in contact with her, and obviously get in contact with me if you want to find out any more, if you'd like to talk about it afterwards. So I really hope that today we will attract some new members, and we will attract interest in other people who care about the site and want this site to be more than a whole load of housing, a site which is a real community, as well as the site with this iconic women's building. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marge. Thank you for that presentation, and yeah, a very nice and very important initiative there. Our next speaker will talk to us about training employability in this redevelopment. This is Linda Clark. Linda.
Thank you. Can you put them on full screen? The slides. Now, I should say I'm Linda Clark. I live locally, but I've also been part of the architecture and planning group and the environmental and sustainability group and the social housing group. So I'm pretty much involved in the whole development. But my main concern is really about the construction process, because I think, as just been pointed out, this is going to go on for a number of years, and it's very important that we plan for it now, and that the community gets advantage from it. Particularly as post-COVID, we're going to be faced with rather severe unemployment problems. And for the young people, it's important that the site offers as many opportunities as we can make. Now, I should say for that, it's important that any training that's given should be a minimum of 3 years. So already we're having to think long term to plan for that now. Particularly as the construction industry is in a mess, and the training system is in a total crisis, and within that there's practically no training for low energy construction, zero energy building, plus the fact, of course, that it's a male dominated sector. So it's really important that women play a much bigger role within the sector. Can I have the next slide, please? That said, the council already has requirements which will be built into their Section 106 requirements, which the developer has to comply with, and plus the requirements are also for training and employment within its local plan. And we also have to, of course, consider the declaration of the climate emergency. So with it, what is already written required by the council, but it needs to be built upon and hasn't yet, the actual requirements for the site haven't been laid down, are on-site opportunities for local residents, including work placements, and working with the council's employment service. Now, the important point here is that the council requires at least 1 trainee per 20 residential units, which could be up to 50 trainees. Now, if we can make sure that this is proper training, that's 3 years, we have it's a really wonderful chance for young people if we can probably plan for it. But I should warn you that on many occasions, contractors have simply brought subcontractors from Birmingham and put a couple of apprentices on sites for a couple of weeks, and that made that count. Well, we should make sure that we have proper training on the site, and work with the local colleges to ensure that, and with the council and the GLA. Now, the other requirement is contributions from the developer, including financial, to support initiatives tackling worklessness. Plus, there should be procurement obligations in relation to local subcontractors, and that can include things like ensuring that there's a proportion of women that are employed. Plus, of course, the other requirements which we need to start asking for are to honour the historical legacy of the site, to conform to the climate emergency, and to make sure this is a proper consultation process. Can I have the next slide, please? So what we need is quality training within a recognised framework, given the skilled nature of construction work. And I think it's important to note that construction is a very dangerous industry, but it also requires increasingly a highly skilled workforce, and one which is energy literate and provides a good future for young people. What's also needed, of course, on the site is good employment conditions, conforming with Unite's construction charter, which means direct employment. So secure employment rather than the bogus self-employment, which is common in the construction sector. Another requirement is what's needed is, as I've said, energy literacy, not just for those who are being trained, but for all workers. And this is, I mean, you're hard pushed to find any training schemes going on or that for energy literacy in construction. And given the legacy of the site, it's also very important that there's a high proportion of women being trained and employed. Now, we suggest a minimum of 30% employed and at least 50% trained to be women. And we've been working and talking to women in construction and women in the manual trades about this. Can I have the next slide, please? So what we're proposing is when these Section 106 clauses should include targets for training, including for women, employment diversity, work placements for local labour, and procurement obligations for subcontractors, including their diversity track record, and conformity to the Charter. Now, we've already started discussions with the Council. This is a really complex process because there's a lot to be done, particularly given the problems of training in the industry. So it all needs to be kind of thought about, including with the further education colleges from now on, and with the women's groups, with Prisoner Education Trust. And I think if you think about how the most effective way of training would be actually to have one of the buildings on the site set aside as a training site. This is always the most effective way of training, because which is properly monitored and doesn't have the same time pressures, because very often subcontractors, contractors just don't have the time to really train someone. And for construction, you can't rely on training on the job. Most of the training, particularly for energy efficiency, needs to be done with the colleges within workshops rather than necessarily on site. And finally, we need to think of the site. I mean, the construction is going through a whole transformation process, and we need to think of the site as really being able to show how the construction industry can be a better industry, an eco-industry, and also be one where training is really important to bring young people and to ensure their future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. That was really, really interesting. just before we have our last speaker, I'd like to ask everyone, and I'm sure Mark will repost this link now that I'm bringing it up. There'll be a little link in the chat which you can click on and fill in your details if you would like to hear, stay in touch, or get more involved with anything that we've been addressing tonight, be that from the training that Linda just discussed, co-housing that Mark discussed, or anything to do with environment and sustainability. That our last speaker, Richard, who has also been responsible for doing the slides and all the videos tonight, Richard Gallen will now talk to us about the environment sustainability on the site.
Okay, thank you. Right then, so yeah, I'm talking on behalf of the Environment and Sustainability Working Group. So it's making sure that Peabody recognise that we are in a climate emergency. So 14% of all UK carbon emissions come from energy use in homes. Fuel poverty, largest item of household expenditure. So we can tackle both these issues of fuel poverty and carbon emissions and the climate emergency with ultra high energy efficiency homes. Unfortunately, the UK building standards are inadequate, overly complex and not enforced. So Peabody are really playing on this complexity and in the inadequacy of the standards, and it's quite difficult for councils to enforce these standards. So from 2025, all new homes must be built to ultra high energy efficiency standards. So this is coming from the Committee on Climate Change. The Committee on Climate Change are a government body set up by the government as a climate change watchdog. So we're not talking about Greenpeace here or Friends of the Earth. This is coming from a government organization. So what does it mean, ultra high energy efficiency standards? Well, in the energy efficiency rating, we're looking at band A there. Currently, how many homes are being built to band A energy efficiency standards in the UK? Well, it's just 1% at the moment. And it's really disappointing as well, because, for example, in the Islington Borough Council, in their planning document, they only require new builds to reach band C of energy efficiency rating. And this document was written in 2012. So unfortunately, it's a little bit out of date. So, you know, we need, Peabody need to be forced really to meet these standards. So what would it look like? What does it look like? Energy efficiency, sort of ultra high energy efficiency standards? Well, you're looking at passive house design. So this is super efficient insulation, natural ventilation, and making the most of sunlight. So what it does is that you don't need radiators and boilers and air conditioners or any of these things, because the design of the building does it by itself. So you're tackling two things here. You're tackling fuel poverty and you're tackling the climate emergency. Peabody say it's too expensive, that we don't have the money. It's so expensive to build passive house design. But in the long term, for the residents, it works out massively cheaper to be able to heat the house using passive house design. And this is quite cutting edge, but it's being done. So, for example, Agar Grove is the largest passive house development in the UK. This is up to 500,000 homes built to passive house standards, passive house accredited. And where is this taking place? It's taking place in Camden. So Camden Council are doing this. So just right next door to us. Peabody says that they want to adapt passive house principles, whatever that means. And they say that the development will decarbonize over time as the UK relies less on fossil fuels. So what they're basically saying is business as usual. We're not going to expend anything extra on ultra high energy efficiency standards. We're going to wait for the power supplies, the energy supplies to decarbonize for us to do that. So sustainability, another really important issue people are concerned about based on the consultations. So rainwater harvesting is something else that we're pushing for. So as you can see from the diagram there, rainwater is collected on the roofs and then stored in underground tanks, and then this is used to water the space of the 9,000 square meters of space on the site. So this green space, so we're looking here at creating community gardens, wildlife areas. We want the green spaces to be community focuses rather than lawns that become sort of dog toilets, really, like you see in a lot of housing estates, unfortunately, around Islington. So trees, As we all know, trees capture CO2 and filter out air pollution in one of the most polluted parts of Islington, next to a road that has 25,000 cars a day. There's 30 mature trees on site. We want to protect all 30 of these mature trees. Peabody have yet to get back to us on whether we will be able to do that, and it's unlikely that that is within their plans. We also want them, the council, we want them to set an example so we can create wildlife rivers in the back garden, so we can have hedgehogs and wildlife moving through the complexity of gardens and green spaces through Islington in one of the most built up boroughs, and the most built up borough in the UK. And finally, of course, sustainable travel. So we want connection to the cycle routes in Parkhurst Road, in Camden Road, cycle routes through the site to all the surrounding areas, and basically making it easier for residents to cycle and walk. We've seen quite a lot now since the lockdowns. We've seen a greater diversity of people cycling, not just, you know, your sort of middle-aged white males on bikes. You see a much greater range of people cycling, and we'd really like a development that encouraged this type of transportation, and of course parking and for accessible vehicles only. So that's environment and sustainability. If you're interested, we have a working group that meets regularly. We're hooking up with the architecture and planning group because a lot of what we do overlaps. So yeah, get in touch. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Richard. That was really inspiring and really interesting. Yeah, like Richard said, please do fill in that form of stay in touch with anything we're doing. We have a couple more minutes to take some questions for Linda or for Marge on co-housing, for Linda on the training plans, or of course for Richard about sustainability and the environment. If you try and use the raise hand feature, then I'll be able to pick you up. Although I see Sophie Benedict's hand up, so we can go straight to Sophie with a question.
Hi, it's actually more of a comment to thank everyone. I thought they were brilliant, all the presentations. And going back to Niki's, just wanted to sort of reiterate about the services, because women who are caught in the criminal justice system, I believe, kind of need to be supported to have a chance to reintegrate back into society. And so for this to happen, these women kind of need society to embrace them, if you like, with the help of the local community, and welcome them back into a society through kind of compassion and care. That's why this women's building is so important, and getting it right is what we have to have, you know, achieved. I worked in the prison for 10 years with various teams who delivered these vital services that actually allowed and enabled the women to kind of get back on their feet, and beyond the kind of stigmatism that they and the sort of the criminality of what they did. And so this is where Peabody have this unique opportunity to build this 21st century building, and I do not understand if they don't do it. When I was listening to their presentation and I saw the women's building, it was like the Emperor's New Clothes I was watching, because I thought, how can they call it a women's building when it's basically the ground floor of the building? So it's a comment more than my frustration that actually I don't know if a women's building is going to exist that really is a testament to what happened on that space.
Thank you, Sophie. That's a really valuable contribution. I couldn't have come up with something better to say than that at this time. I have Niki. Would you like to ask one more question, please?
Well, can I just come in on that a little bit, yeah, and say that this opportunity, there was a Courtyard report put out 10 years ago by the government that implies that the community needs to have much more infrastructure in it to support women who have come out of the prison system. And if this isn't the most amazing opportunity to provide that infrastructure, I really don't know what is. So that was just my comment from Sophie.
No, I personally couldn't agree more, Niki. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask? Otherwise, we're going to hand it over to Alexandra. And I'm thinking I'm doing just that, Alexandra. It's 8:30, so our timing is pretty decent tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, from me.
Well, that's all I wanted to end by saying, in a moment, we're gonna play out with a film by Reclaim Holloway. Reclaim Holloway was one of the first groups that gathered after hearing about the prison closure and built momentum, particularly around the issue of the women's building. So, I mean, a huge tribute to them for all the community activism that has happened. We're going to play out with their film, but before that, just want to say a massive thank you. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. You've been fantastic, some brilliant presentations that have been so informative and inspiring. Thank you for all your hard work in those. If you want to show your appreciation, please do pop up a little reaction on your screen. Thank you so much, particularly to the campaign working group, who have done loads of work behind the scenes. They have been absolutely fantastic to galvanise this evening and grow support. And particularly I want to thank Debbie and Mark as well, who both work. We have two people who work for Community Plan for Holloway and who've put together this evening, who've done a fantastic job. Everyone has been so impressed. We've had so many wonderful positive comments. You really deserve them. And to Richard, who has done all the tech, my goodness, bringing together all those different presentations, not a moment's slippage. Thank you so much for doing a fantastic job, Richard. It's so appreciated. You've done a fantastic job this evening. But thank you to everyone who has come. Thank you for giving up this evening and being so passionate about this really important cause. Keep engaged, sign up if you haven't already signed up, get involved in the working groups, whichever things really pull on your heartstrings, whatever things you're particularly passionate about, whether it's the environment group, the architecture group, whether it's about co-housing, the women's group, social housing. We've got something for everyone. Sign up and please keep engaged. We're in it for the long haul, and we need as many voices as possible engaged. So please do keep informed, keep engaged. Thank you for this evening, and we're going to play out with the film by Reclaim Holloway. Take care.
Is public land, and most people land behind us is public land, and most people walking past it don't even know that it is now closed.
What we're worried about is that the land will be handed over to private developers to build housing that will be unaffordable to many people.
Prison experience for inmates.
Are any of them going to have a quick...
Across the prison estate, we're also recruiting more staff to make sure we make our prisons safer.
When our prisons are relics from the time of Dickens, it is time to sell them off and build new ones that actually work.
This isn't about improving prison conditions. There's far worse prison conditions than Holloway if they were going to close prisons based on prison conditions. This is about the value of the land that they want to sell off, to sell public land for private profit. That profit will happen on the land in Holloway through private property developers and when private companies get contracts to build new prisons and run new prisons.
It is one of the biggest hidden injustices in this country, who we are sending to prison and for what. So maybe the closure can be meaningful, the closure of Holloway can be meaningful and right this wrong.
We need a women's building on this site. That means a place where services that were lost through Holloway's closure can be housed, where women's organisations can set up, and where women themselves can come to organise, to heal and create what they need for themselves.
Benefits, living, housing, you know, all of that stuff that needs to be, they need help with. And why couldn't that happen in a building here?
It's such a significant place. You know, where women would go to it and women would make a difference and women would probably grow and develop and achieve and become a part of it and develop something else within it. Yeah. You know,
take on its own life.
would take on its own life.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, keep in touch, keep informed, keep engaged. And thank you for being here this evening. Goodbye for now.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.